Hello everyone. So a few days ago I made and published my Big Brother Canada 2 retrospective review, and now it's time for me to rank them based on how I feel about them as players and put them into tiers. So once again, the tiers are abysmal, bad, potential, mediocre, solid, good, or great. And I had a tough time with this cast. I changed my list several times, and I'm still not the most sure as to where I placed some of these people, where compared to BBCAN1, where I was sure where everyone was going from the onset. This one was definitely challenging, and I switched so many people around, put some people into so many different tiers, it's just all over the place. And one of the main reasons is due to Canada's HOH completely screwing things up. So the abysmal tier is for people who either have no hope in any game or people who just had absolutely no positives in their game. Paul is the first person that I think of when I think of an abysmal player in BBCAN2, and he is last. He made way too many alliances in the beginning, and the fact that he was the first HOH and people rejected it says a lot, since that's usually when the majority alliance that dominates a season takes place. He tried and failed to get Andrew out, who was in the majority alliance, and it caused most of the house to turn on him. He made a spectacle during the nomination ceremony where he called Andrew racist and sexist, causing literally the entire house to yell at him. He only had Kyle and Adele as allies. He had a poor strategy of pissing people off so he could be a goat, which was way too early to think about being a goat, and it just made him an early boot that no one wanted around. Someone who wanted to work with him in Ica still put him up on the block when there were many other options to use as a pawn. He ended up going home against someone who was hated and someone who the HOH actually wanted out because he was so disliked. At 14th place is Nick, and she's only here and at 15th because she made less mistakes than Paul. So, she actively went out of her way to not play the game and to have no strategy, and she wanted quote-unquote luck/fate to handle things, which clearly didn't work out well for her. It didn't seem like she was fitting in anywhere, nor did it seem like she had any allies, and still likely goes home even if Andrew remained on the block next to her. I don't see her doing well in any season, despite the lack of context regarding her pertaining feed-wise. That's why she is here, outside of just being the first boot. 13th place really shouldn't shock anyone, but I wouldn't be shocked if some people end up being shocked with this person, and that is Ica. I know she has a good season in the future, but her game in this season is no better than utterly atrocious. I feel like she's a high variance, inconsistent player who most likely doesn't do well if you put her in a lot of seasons, so I don't think she would be very, very consistent. And a lot of that has to do with some of the stuff that she showed in this season, so I feel fine putting her BBCAN2 iteration here. Aiko was aligned with most of the mean girls, but she was expendable to all of them and did not have enough close bonds with any of them, which she further alienated during her HOH with her antics. She was clearly a huge target from the very beginning, as the first 5 always wanted to target her, and many people didn't like her due to her attitude and seeing her as someone who was cutthroat. She won an HOH and POV, but she misused her power. She nominated 2 people who were no threats to her in Heather and Paul, the latter who she wanted to work with, while ignoring the people gunning for her, Andrew and Kenny. When she had the chance to fix things with the POV win, she didn't use it. She made an emotional move with targeting Heather, and she didn't even accomplish that. One of her closest allies, Rochelle, ended up backdooring her the very next week, when it was a horrendous move for her to do so. There was literally no pushback from anyone to stop this from happening. Honestly, I see no positives in her game whatsoever. And the final person in the abysmal tier is Kyle. I initially had him a lot higher on the list, but I kept on changing the list and realizing that he played more and more poorly than I realized. He made a very poor first impression on the house guests in the beginning, and I believe he was the sole person that the majority loathed well after the season as well. He came off as extremely obnoxious and callous. He had a poor enough social game where his athletic nature and youth should have made it easy for people to work with him, especially the likes of the first 5 and some of the others, but he found himself only aligned with Adele and Paul, and him going to Paul during the nomination ceremony wasn't a good idea, and I don't think he realized that he would have been the backdoor option if Adele didn't tell him. And now I'm going to talk about the people who fit into the bad tier, which are people who have many, many, many flaws in the game that would prevent them from doing well in most seasons, but there's either the one or two things that doesn't make them completely irredeemable. At 11th place is Rochelle. So she was part of the female alliance, but only really had close ties to Sabrina and completely dropped the ball with many of the others. She didn't repair her relationship with Netta afterwards, meaning after her HOH reign, was catty to many of the other house guests, and isolated herself socially more and more throughout the season as it went on. She took out an ally in Aika who was a shield for her on her own HOH and not even getting in with the first five, where the move would make somewhat sense. Aika was never targeting her and was someone that the other side would have taken out over herself. She played way too emotionally instead of strategically, especially during her HOH, and wanting to target Heather throughout a majority of the season wasn't going to accomplish anything. Partially due to this, she was extremely passive in the game, and that's not a way to win or to earn much respect throughout the house guests. She wasn't a threat to win, nor was she respected by anyone in the house, but was taken out because Sabrina was the bigger goat, and she was better in competitions in comparison. Outside of her HOH, her passivity made it easier for her to coast along compared to some of the more aggressive players, and she's pretty good in competitions, so that's why she's here and not on the bottom tier. At 10th place is Sabrina. So she did have some good manipulation skills, or at least in the beginning of the season, but it did seem like she cannot adapt or grow her skills in a different way as the season went on. Afterwards, she just mainly used her tears and whining to attempt to manipulate the others as the season went on, but no one bought it. While she was telling everyone that she was a mastermind, especially telling us, Canada, that she was the mastermind, though she only influenced Richelle and Aika to a lesser extent, and while she did have some of the skills, she was not aware that she was also being manipulated by some of the first five members, specifically Kenny and to a lesser extent Sarah, and did not realize that the entire house didn't respect her as a player. Her personality was very abrasive and rubbed people the wrong way, but once she was nominated by America, she was made to be a very easy pawn. She thought that her social game was why she survived all of those rounds, but it was due to her being a goat. Also, it didn't help that she wasn't good in competitions, and it was a main factor as to why she was kept around over some of her allies and even people in the Sloppy Seconds alliance. At 9th place is Adele. I honestly forgot how poor of a player he was until I did this rewatch. He didn't make much allies in the first half of the season and consistently aligned with the people who are on their way out. In the first week, he lumped himself in with Kyle and Paul, who are on their outs and weren't good players, and they would make up the second and third boot. He then sided with Aika, whose target grew during her HOH, and she was also an early boot, being booted fourth. The house knew that Canada liked him from week 3 when he won that Vita prize from Canada, and I think it was one of the reasons why the house guests left him alone, which only continued when Canada's HOH made it clear who was liked and who was not liked. So I think that was an element of luck that he benefited from, and it wasn't something that he could control. He had moments where he had good strategic reads, like predicting that Andrew had a bigger plan than targeting Paul, and that Aika needed to talk to Rachel since she could be a replacement nominee. But he also had bad reads of making obnoxious speeches and pissing people off, hoping people would take him to the end and that his final speech would win people over, so he had the same strategy that Paul did, and final speeches are never the indicating or a main factor as to changing people's jury votes. Adele did use his likability to his advantage at times, mainly from Canada, and did make the house guests laugh enough to enjoy his company, so people were fine enough with keeping him around. But I do think that he played way too personally at times, like his HOH and wanting Sabrina gone over Rachel, and he just wasn't a jury threat to win. And the final person in this tier at 8th is Andrew, and I can't believe I'm putting him this high, but I feel like he was definitely screwed over / unlucky, while the people below him mainly benefited from luck or was just bad and showed more bad skills. Overall, he is still too emotional and obnoxious for the game, as he left a bad first impression on the first night, and his abrasive personality rubbed people the wrong way. He could be molded unlike Tom, which is why I do have high prospects for him as a player, and he calmed down enough to make the right strategic move in targeting Kyle over Paul during his HOH, when he originally wanted Paul out when he won the cup. But it was because others were mainly guiding him, and not Andrew coming to those conclusions himself. He was good in competitions though, and that's definitely a strong benefit in his favor. He also benefited off the strong social games of Kenny, Sarah, and Arlie, so he could thrive. It's a good thing that he did have allies that were very loyal to him and to give him information, but it was not him offering much to the Alliance, and he was often a detriment to the Alliance, where it brought a lot of attention to them, and his personality even rubbed them the wrong way. Whenever something was happening that he didn't want, he would lash out, curse people out, and throw vulgarities, like Heather not picking Kenny for the veto, and when he heard that Heather was going home over Paul during Ika's HOH. If it wasn't for the others moving things over, he probably wouldn't have gotten what he wanted. There is a good chance that he lasts a few more weeks without the twist, but the fact that most of the house wanted to target him before Kenny, despite being a worse player, is a hugely negative trait. Now, the potential tier is for people who I think are either pretty unlucky or didn't really have much of a chance to hone the skills that they naturally had, or are people I think would do okay or better consistently if they're on another season. I don't think they're good players, but I don't think they're bad players either. There's only one person on this tier from this season, and that is Allison. So she was very unlucky in the fact that she came in 2 weeks late, where most of the alliances and bonds were already set in stone, and it put her in the position where she had to play catch up for most of her time in the house, putting her at a huge disadvantage. Allison wasn't great socially, since the girls immediately didn't trust her once she entered the house, and it was mainly because she knew Kenny, though that went nowhere, and we never actually hear her say that she knew Kenny, though that could have been a feeds thing. And she started a showmance with Andrew within her first 24 hours of being in the house, and Andrew already had a huge target on him. But her relationship with Andrew also made the first 5 alliance untrusting of her, so they didn't even see her as a useful number. She had some solid strategic reads, like knowing when to flip from a sinking ship, joining the sloppy seconds, knowing that she was at the bottom of that alliance, which many of the others didn't know when they were at the bottom this season, and using her veto to change the trajectory of the game, though not voting out Arlie was an immediate choke. I just feel like if she was put on an even playing ground, she would have done better. The 4th tier is the mediocre tier, and this is for people who I don't think are good or bad players, and are just meh overall. Very average at best, I would say. So at number 6, and the only person in this tier I have is Heather. So her social game was really poor for the first part of the season. The women strongly loathed her, to the point where they targeted her emotionally as soon as they could, and even many of the guys didn't like her either. Her first scenes in the season involved people talking about how much of a rat she is, and all this caused her to be put on the block during weeks 3 and 4. I believe this was due to the ping pong telephone game that was happening between Kenny, herself, and Rochelle, if I remember correctly. Or it might have been Andrew, herself, and Rochelle, but either way, just wasn't a good look on her part. She didn't seem like she had any solid allies, exiting the 4th week and going into the 5th week, and it was Canada's HOH that put her in the position to be in a solid alliance, since the first 5 were disliked and all the liked people formed an alliance with one another. She did continue the momentum from Canada's HOH with winning HOH and then getting Sarah out of the house. But I don't know if Canada's HOH didn't happen and then she won the same HOH that she would have made the same move. It seemed like she missed a lot of social and strategic cues that she should have picked up on, like she was shocked that Ika and Sabrina didn't like her after being nominated in week 3 and then being saved in week 4, not doing certain tasks that she needed to do so she could win some competitions, so on and so forth. Heather also didn't notice that the entire house wanted her out at Final 5, which was a huge misnomer on her part. Despite all of her flaws, Heather was a big jury threat to win, and it seemed like the jury respected her the 3rd most, outside of John and Netta. I don't know if you put her in many seasons that she would do well on, as I think a lot of the flaws that I mentioned in the beginning could cause for early exits more often than not. So the fifth tier is the solid tier. So these are people who I feel like if you put them on most seasons, they would do well, and they have a lot of good traits for the game that would cause them to thrive. But they just don't have that extra sauce to be great or the top of the top. And they do have some noticeable flaws that puts them below the elite. But they have enough skills that put them above the mediocre and the poor players. So in fifth is Sarah, and it's crazy that I have a pre-juror higher than a lot of the jurors. So it seemed like everyone in the house liked and respected her throughout the first few weeks, which was beneficial to her, causing her to be the swing vote in the third week. Even after she pissed off half the house, she did end up repairing relations with them. Socially, she didn't have much of a problem in the house. She was in a good position within the first five. Kenny and Arlie had her as their number ones, with Andrew and Sabrina respecting her as well. She was in a good position with the Girls Alliance, and realized that she could have floated. My issue is that she gave away all of her agency for the benefit of Kenny and Andrew, and even in the veto competition that Kenny won, she cheered for him, making it clear that he was the most important person to her, and it left others like Arlie resentful, causing her to go home. If it wasn't for Canada's HOH, I do think she would have lasted a while longer. It also didn't help that during the last HOH competition that she took part in, they heard the boos from Canada whenever a first five player was eliminated, and that never helps someone's game and often disadvantages them. No one was targeting her up to that point, even though people like Neda didn't trust her, but there were bigger priorities than her that they wanted to deal with. And her alliance was in the top before a twist that no one had any control over in the house came into play. But when things weren't in her favor, she couldn't overcome it and get herself out of it. So at fourth place is Kenny, and it's weird that I have a pre-juror this high on the list, and I don't see it happening often in any of the other seasons that I end up covering in this manner. It felt like he was one of the better strategic people in the house. He had a dominant alliance where he was in a great position within the alliance and had people not in the alliance like John and Rochelle being on solid terms with him. Even Allison wanted to save him during his end in BBCAN2. People didn't hate him like they did Andrew, so his social skills were not the issue. He knew when people were trying to bluff him, like Ika during her HOH, was able to intercept her plans, causing Paul to go home, came up with the plan to backdoor Kyle instead of targeting Paul, which is what Andrew wanted, and he was completely outplaying John before Canada's HOH stopped it. He was solid in competitions as he won 2 vetoes if I remember correctly, but I don't get the impression that he would be a competition beast, despite the house feeling the need to backdoor him, and him eventually getting backdoored. I don't know why he was so insistent on passing as a straight man for strategy purposes, though I don't think there would have been any difference in his gameplay if he was just open about being gay. He does get way too emotional at times, to the point where he was known as a crier in the house, lashed out at people a few times, though nowhere near as much as Andrew or Sabrina. I also think that his association, Andrew, being so close to him, hurt him, and everyone came to the realization that he was the leader of the group, so he was always going to be seen as a target due to that, and it does indicate poor threat management on his part. And the final person in the solid tier at third is Early. I initially had him quite a bit lower, but after sorting through everything and changing this list a few times, I feel like this was the deserving spot for him. He was in one of the best positions in the house, and I don't know if he actually realized it. He was in the Power Alliance as the first 5, but was not seen as the leader of it, like Kenny and Andrew were, but he was not in the bottom of it like Sabrina was, and he was still a respected member of the Alliance. He was also on good terms with outsiders like John and Heather as well, and Adele too. He also ran around the house naked, and while his social game was not as great as he thought it was, he did have a good social game, and people enjoyed his presence in the house. Arlie threw a lot of competitions in the beginning of the house, which is good strategy, but he made the same mistake that Alec did, where it became obvious to the others that he was blatantly throwing, the prime example of this being at the double eviction HOH. He also talked up himself like he was a mastermind, and people were able to see it and believe it too. What I will say about him is that he was aware about Neda having a more cutthroat side to her, hence not wanting her to get anywhere close to the end, which many people were blind towards. I do give him props for flipping, but I think he should have been a bit less obvious about it, and he should have played both sides a bit longer, since the first 5 were not targeting him, and his own alliance turned on him right after most of his old allies were booted. It was very impressive to see that he was able to convince Sabrina, Rachel, and Allison to keep him, though Neda and John reversed that, but it ended up not working, and it shows that his social capital was thrown in the wrong place and was not as strong as it should have been for him and in the position that he found himself in, and the motives that the other 3 needed and what was best for their game. And now it is time to talk about the good tier. I didn't put anyone in this tier in Big Brother Canada 1, but there is one person who fits in this tier. And good tier players are people who aren't the best of the best, but they are consistently good. They have all the skills to do well in Big Brother, and they've shown that they're able to get out of sticky situations and are just good Big Brother players. They have all the skills that are needed, but they're just missing that extra something that makes them short of being the best of the best. So at the silver prize of second goes to John. So his social game was his biggest strength throughout the season. Everyone loved him, found him to be a very fun presence, and while he was not in the majority alliance, he was kind of like an affiliate due to his close relations to the guys in that alliance. He and Neda were also very close in the beginning of the season. Everyone knew how likable he was, and it was one of the reasons why he became a target, since it was obvious that he would win if he got to the end. He was able to win competitions when he needed to, as he dominated most of the competitions in the second half of the season, and I think it's why I think he might have made it past week 5, just based on the veto comp he won during that week. But John was still extremely lucky, since he was being outplayed by Kenny, but Candace HOH saved his position, where he was the likely target going into that week, and this is one of the reasons why he isn't in the great tier. He was also able to see who was liked, who was disliked, and created the sloppy second alliance based on it, but he did have the social game that many lacked to make that alliance happen. Strategically, he wasn't the best, especially in the beginning. I don't know if he intended on kissing up to the majority alliance in the first few weeks, but it was smart at first, but he never actually integrated with them, or into them, and was shocked when Kenny rejected him. John backdooring early was not a good move, and there are many other moments where he made a lot of moves for Neda's benefit. I will say that he did pick up on the skill of getting rid of threats, and he started seeing through Neda at around the final 5 round, and he realized that he had to play for himself, so he cut her. But that was also one of the reasons why I didn't put him in the top tier, due to being strategically guided into making bad decisions at times. And the final tier is the great tier, and these are the best of the best Big Brother players, and these are the people who are essentially legends based off their gameplay, and who just outplay everyone. And of course, the number 1 prize goes to Neda in this season. I don't know if she's going to stay here if I include her BBCAN2 game, but that's something to discuss way further down in the future. I think her weakest element, even in this season, is definitely her social skills. While she was seen as the least threatening of the non-First 5 members, meaning her strategy worked as she wasn't doing poor socially, she really used those skills to benefit her, and she aligned with the more likable and more social people as the season went on. Initially, she did align with the Mean Girls in the first few weeks, but she couldn't keep them together. Strategically, she knew that she had to appear weak and lessen her personality, since a lot of the larger personalities and more aggressive game players were getting targeted early. Neda also threw a lot of competitions for this same reason, and did not want to give people anything to think that she was a gamer, but she did it in a way that didn't make her come off as a goat. When she needed to start winning competitions and to show her threat level, she did win them pretty easily and gave off the impression that she was a threat that could win. She was always thinking about herself and was very self-interested, which is why she was able to convince John to make poor moves for himself, like targeting Arlie and Adele, and convincing her allies to boot Allison. Unfortunately, this would eventually be her downfall, since John caught on after she told Adele about his forthcoming eviction when they agreed that they weren't going to. And it's also something we would see in her BBCAN5 game as well. She is definitely the strongest person strategically in the house. She got out many of the girls for playing emotionally and that it would be their downfall, knew when to close her mouth, knew what game moves needed to be made, was very good at reading people, their motivations, their motives, and what makes sense strategically for other people, even if it didn't align with herself, and what makes sense strategically for herself. She was always thinking one step ahead, which is something a lot of her allies didn't do. So that is my ranking of the BBCAN2 cast based on their skills and gameplay, and I only think there are 5 relatively good players in the season in this element, and all of the others just aren't good. I think that would mean that the BBCAN 2 cast is a bit stronger gameplay wise than BBCAN 1, but I don't think it's that different. I'm definitely looking forward to getting into BBCAN 3 and the future seasons, since those are the seasons that I haven't rewatched at all since they aired. So it'll be a fresher experience for me. Thank you for following this journey, and I'll be back with something soon. Bye!